So I'm on holiday in Florida with the family, doing all the parks and all that good stuff, and so far it's been bloody marvellous. But for somebody who's obsessed with cars, has a YouTube channel about cars, and could probably write a book about American culture and my fascination with it, it would be a bit of a missed opportunity for me to not talk a little bit about American cars while I'm here. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to share with you my thoughts and observations about the marvel that is American cars from our American rental car, just for effect. I'm going to try and have some fun with this, but also stir up some debate, hopefully, that's healthy, which, you know, often it isn't. But I'm going to share with you what I think about all this, the good and the bad. So if that sounds good, buckle up and let's get into it. Okay, so if you've been to America before, you'll already know this, and I've been to America a lot. I've got family here, and I've actually lived in New York as well. And so I've seen a lot of American cars in my time, but it never fails to amaze me how absolutely massive they are compared to cars back home. And in Florida, from what I can see, I reckon about 70% of the cars on the road are SUVs or trucks. And I'm not just talking SUVs like we would say back in the UK. I'm talking ones that are absolutely blimmin' massive, and that things that we would consider a large SUV in the UK would barely be even a mid-size over here. Our rental car is a blimmin' beast. It's the Kia Telluride, which is a full 3-row SUV, which still leaves a bit of boot space as well. And the hilarious thing about it is you can't actually get this in the UK, assuming because the market for it would be too small. You can get the Kia Sorento, which is technically a 7-seater, but this back row are basically like mini seats. This is proper 3 rows. And the hilarious thing is, my sister's rental car, because they're over here as well, is a Chevy Suburban, and that is an absolute monster of a thing. And this Kia Telluride, which would look massive compared to other SUVs back home, looks like a little midget compared to that. I mean, to get in the Chevy Suburban's taking the piss a wee bit. I mean, if you've got problems with mobility, you're going to struggle to get in that without a stepladder. And to get out of it, if you're a small child, you might need a parachute. You simply could not practically drive a lot of American cars on British roads. The size of them just would not be possible on certain roads, let alone parking them, the length, the width, etc. But it's not just that, like the handling side of things is just shockingly bad. And they don't need to be good at handling, because most of the type of driving they do here is on straight, flat roads. There's not a lot of turning to do, and so it's not a problem. But if you were to try and take even this Telluride onto the roads near my house, my kids would be blowing chunks all over the back seat and the windscreen all day long. On the flip side though, they are mostly majoring in comfort over that kind of driving dynamism. And so when you're just cruising along with your family loaded up, they've got loads of space and the suspension's soft, as long as you're not doing big corners fast, they're very comfortable, you know, and so from that perspective, they do that well. There's just so many of these massive SUVs out there though. I mean, the suburban ones, you'd think that was kind of like a niche market car, but they're everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And so you think, what's the average family size in America? Surely must be like 8 or something. No, it's not, it's under 4. So you're like, why do so many people need to have a car that's got that much space and that many seats? Could somebody please explain this to me? And that's just the SUVs, you know, there's pickup trucks everywhere you look. And to me, they're really ugly, to be honest. And when I look at pickup trucks at home, almost anybody that drives a pickup truck either has some sort of tradesman type business or they're a farmer, you know. I don't see many people recreationally driving around in their pickup truck at home, but everybody seems to want one over here. And I'm really trying to figure out why, you know. Is there a lot more tradesmen per capita here than there are back home? I genuinely don't know. Or is it that people go to Costco and go absolutely bananas all the time, you know, and so they need a 2,000 litre load bay for that, you know? I just can't get my head around it, but they're a real status thing here. People just want to be up in the pickup truck, you know? So how did it get to this, that cars have gotten so big over the years in America? Is it a bit like the gun culture? And oh God, I'm really taking a risk bringing this one up, but you know, obviously part of the gun culture is that people feel like, well, I better have more guns or bigger guns to make sure I'm safe compared to other people, you know, and that's that. Everybody just keeps buying more guns because they feel like they need to be as safe as everybody else, and it just kind of escalates that way. Is it kind of the same thing? I don't know, but I'm thinking if I was in a Honda Civic, and you do see quite a few Honda Civics and like small Kias and stuff like that kicking about, and Toyotas, but if I was in one of those and I was flanked by massive SUVs on either side of me and I've got one up the rear sort of tailgating me, I'd find that quite intimidating. So I can see why if you kind of get that vibe that there's just loads of those sort of cars around. It might then make you want to go and buy a bigger car just so you feel safer and just feel less intimidated. I can see that. And coming back to this sort of practical nature of having a lot of ground clearance, that can be useful in certain situations, but most of the driving that Americans do is on flat, straight roads, as I've said. And there isn't many hills, and the last time I checked, Florida didn't have any snow, barring a bit of flooding, and we did drive through some flooding the other night, which was a little bit disconcerting, but it wasn't like to the point where, oh my God, thank God I had that SUV that was like a giraffe to get through it, you know? But they don't have a practical need in a lot of cases to actually have a car that has the capability that these 4x4s seem to have. So from that perspective, it also doesn't seem to make a huge amount of sense as a necessity to drive such a high riding car. So on this point, when I try to rationalize this, I'm like, what is the main driving force behind why there's so many big cars on the roads? And the main thing I can always come back to is I think really it's a status thing and it's an image, and it's like everybody wants to lose. It's just American culture is bigger is better. That's just the way it is. And I'm not criticizing that, but I think that is a huge part of it. The practical elements of why you need cars like this don't really stack up to me. But I also think, and I'm being, totally honest here, if we lived in America, I think I would probably have a big SUV as well. One, I've got a family, but I think I would still want to have a fairly big car from a safety perspective. So I probably just think the same as everybody else. If I had a monster truck behind me and I was in a wee Civic, I'd feel quite intimidated by that. I mean, what if he rear-ended me? He'd probably go over the top of me, So there is an element of that, but what happens? Do they just keep getting bigger? If car manufacturers keep making them bigger, will other people go, oh, I better get a bigger car then? Where does it stop? But that is just part of the picture here, that is, the fascination doesn't stop there. There's definitely a darker side to this for me, and I'm going to get probably a bit of hate on this one because some people are just going to go down the whole climate change denial route. And please don't do that, okay? This is just my thoughts, but the facts are the engine sizes in cars here are massively bigger than anywhere else. I mean, the average engine size in America is 2.9 litres. What? Our Kia that we're driving has a 3.8 litre V6 engine in it. You can't even get anything bigger than a 1.6 out of a Hyundai Kia product back in the UK. Everything else is a hybrid. 1.6, this is a 3.8. That is a massive engine, and that is an average size car basically, If you look at the Suburban that my sister's driving, it's either a 5 something or a 6 litre engine, V8 as well, This is an engine that's reserved for sports cars, really good sports cars back home. And that's just in a people carrier, Like, what on earth is that all about? Who needs a 6 litre engine in their family SUV? If you're driving a V8 back home, the chances are it's a sports car and a really, really highly regarded one. But over here, that's nothing, absolutely nothing. People are driving around in V8s all over the shop, just absolutely burning through petrol and making a lovely sound, don't get me wrong, but just unnecessarily fast cars, considering most of the time they're sitting in traffic. And I'm sure it varies from state to state. Like California is probably gonna have way more EVs than it does here, but I have not seen too many of them. I've seen a few Cybertrucks, not a fan, but yeah, there's been very few EVs kicking about, to be honest. And so it's not a really big thing. So we're not getting a lot of cars going around that are actually producing zero emissions at all. And as I say, with the average engine size being 2.9 litres, unsurprisingly, I'm not seeing a huge amount of 4 cylinders kicking about. And to be fair though, if so many of the cars on the roads are massive SUVs and pickups, well, that's not a surprise, because how would you move them with a 4 cylinder? You just wouldn't get anywhere. But back to the carbon footprint stuff, whether you're a climate change denier or really believe in it, and I happen to believe climate change is a real thing and that we all need to be doing our part to drive down emissions in all sorts of things, not just driving. But if that is, let's say for the sake of argument, that the emissions that cars are producing is a massive factor in the demise of our climate and across the globe, then controversial, but is it fair to then say that America is producing way more of a carbon footprint than most countries, and therefore having a disproportionately massively negative effect on the planet? But as somebody in Europe and Britain, you must feel a bit deflated when you come over to America and you see the size of the engines here and the amount of fumes that they're pumping out, and go, we're busting our asses, trying to drive to net zero and all that sort of stuff. We're really doing our bit, we're driving small engines, plug-in hybrids, electric cars. Yeah, you come over to a country the size of America, which is a much, much bigger country than the UK, and they just couldn't give a toss, you know? People are driving around in grotesquely large engines that they just do not need for their daily life and pumping out a massive amount of fumes in the atmosphere. And it's okay, you know? So all the efforts we're making is just a drop in the ocean. I'm sorry, but I do look at that and I just think, that kind of sucks. But then you got to look at all the other factors. You know, fuel, gas is way cheaper in America than it is back home. It's like half the price. So it's not like it costs that much to run these massive engines, you know? So that's not a disincentive to not have one in the first place, never mind the tax side of things. But it all comes down to what your government is pushing in terms of, you know, taxes and stuff like that and cost. Because if we were allowed to have big gas guzzlers in the UK, without penalties, more people would drive them, you know? And as a car enthusiast, if I could run a 6-cylinder petrol for peanuts, I would probably have one as well. So I'm not saying I'm some, you know, moral high ground guy here on this. I'm just saying that the rules of engagement are just so completely different that it's not really a massive surprise that so many people over here are like, just gonna ride about in my 6-litre V8. But changing tack a little bit, and this is a positive for American cars for sure in my opinion, is that they all seem a bit, well, if this Kia and the Suburban's anything to go by, then they seem a bit more backwards, but in a good way. Like, everything's not on a touchscreen, you know, there's lots of digital stuff and it all feels very modern, but you've still got loads of really easy to press buttons for shortcuts, for media and for your AC and stuff, you know. It's like they've got the balance just right of buttons and infotainment and just modernness, you know. It's not like everything is a massive touchscreen like we seem to be doing in Europe. And even like the gear selector, this has still got a nice big mechanical gear selector as opposed to some wee dinky shift-by-wire thing. So they're simplifying certain things in ways that I'm like, well, that's how it should stay. You know, we're moving forward in ways I don't like in Europe and the UK, but here they still seem to be just doing the old school thing in certain ways, and I like that. But I've got to call balls and strikes and the red indicators that you get on a lot of American cars. Don't really get it, to be honest. If you have a amber indicator, it contrasts in colour to the red light that you have on your rear tail light. So when somebody indicates, you can see it flashing very obviously. But when it's a red indicator, not as easy to spot. So I don't really understand that. From a safety perspective, that does not make a lot of sense. Maybe they think that that's just one of these things where, you know, you can just deregulate, but I'm like, that's clearly not as safe, you know. So yep, not getting that one. And some people might disagree with this one, just my opinion and my observation from being in Florida. But I mean, don't get me wrong, I've seen a lot of cool cars out here. My kids are getting really excited when they see things like a Mustang or a Cybertruck. But I find American cars a little bit bland in some areas, like in terms of there's not a huge amount of difference in the way they look. Like some Chevys and some Fords and some Cadillacs, whatever, they all look big SUVs. They all look very similar, you know, from a distance. It's like it's quite hard to tell the difference. And so yeah, there just isn't that much design cues that are like really obvious to spot. So a lot of cars just look very much the same on the roads. But the thing I have noted, and there's a lot of really wild looking colored cars, but for the sort of normal cars, you know, if you see somebody driving a Lamborghini or something, you're like, yeah, they usually have a bright orange or something. But there is a lot of cars that just seem to be black, grey and white. You know, there's not a lot of reds and yellows and greens. You know, it just feels like the differentiation of colours is a little bit less than I see back home. So again, that just makes cars feel a bit more generic and bland on the roads, and they don't stand out from each other. Just my opinion. And there are cars that are made specifically for the North American market that we just don't get back home. Like European cars that, you know, you would assume Europe would get dibs on, you know, being like, for example, Volkswagen. You'd be like, okay, they're making cars that they're selling everywhere. But I saw a Volkswagen the other day and I was like, I have never seen that one before. It was an SUV and it wasn't very nice looking, to be honest, but it was an SUV that was like not a Tiguan, not a Touareg, just something else. And I was like, they've obviously made that for this market. And I'm like, why? Why are they designing a different car for this market? Like, fair enough, give different engine options or whatever, but it was a totally different looking car. But yeah, there are cars out here that we just do not get at home. And some of the Asian cars as well, like Toyota, Kia, you know, Honda, etc. There's cars here that I'm looking at on the roads going, oh, that's one we don't get at home, and I wish we did, but we don't. And you can have a really good game of Spot the Estate or Wagon over here. There's very few of them, and I know from the comments of some videos that I've seen, a lot of Americans are crying out for wagons, but they just don't seem to get the option. You know, it's just SUVs all the time, but there's very few of them out here, and there's a lot of sedans, or as we would call them, saloons, whereas the saloon market back in the UK is almost dead. There's very few saloons out there, and if anything, they're kind of liftbacks or hatchbacks now. You just don't see many of them. So the preferences of the American buyer compared to the European and British buyer are very clearly different. So I'm going to wrap this up. I need to get on with the holiday. I'm absolutely amazed by American cars, but more in bad ways than good ways, but I'm not really necessarily blaming the American consumer for it either. You know, I look at the cars and I just think they're just so unnecessary in so many cases, you know, in size and performance and carbon footprint, all that sort of stuff. It's just fascinating to me that the consumerism is so wild, but it's allowed to be like that, you know. But at the same time, there are some really cool cars here, and I've actually quite enjoyed driving on American roads, which is more so than I've ever done in the past. But as I say, if the climate change thing is a real thing, it's like we're just gonna have to accept that some countries just aren't really doing their part and hope that, you know, we don't all pay a heavy price for it. But based on the things I'm seeing on the roads here, if it's as bad as the scientists say that it is, then we're doomed because the cars here surely are bad for that. I'm going to finish with a little sidetrack from the main point of this video, which is just to say that I have seen more dangerous driving and wild things on the roads in less than 2 weeks here than I have in a year at home. And to be fair, you got to offset the fact there's a lot more cars here, a lot more people driving, so there is, you know, that closes the gap a bit. But some really crazy stuff, people just cutting you off and just changing direction randomly, and you're like, no matter how good a driver you are, you could have a serious accident over here, you know, and it is a real risk driving on these roads because people just do some crazy stuff and selfish stuff, and it's mental. Like, you know, the respect that drivers have for other drivers is just way lower from what I can see. And that's kind of backed up maybe by the fact I've seen quite a lot of cars being driven with missing bumpers and stuff and just damage to them. And there's injury lawyer commercial ads on the side of the highways on boards all over the place, you know. It's just mental. Like, you know, America really is just absolutely fascinating. All the good, all the bad, but I still love it. But I hope you enjoyed the video, guys, and if you did, please leave me a like and leave me a comment with your thoughts on it, and don't forget to share it as well and subscribe, because there's loads more coming up on the channel, lots of reviews coming up as well. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.